The sun was setting over the city zoo, casting long shadows across the winding pathways and animal enclosures. The air was thick with the sounds of chirping birds, distant roars, and the occasional chatter of visitors heading toward the exit. It was closing time, and the zoo was nearly empty, except for a small group of employees finishing up their duties. Among them was Marcus, a 12-year-old boy who had been volunteering at the zoo for the past few months. Marcus loved animals, especially the lions. He'd spend hours watching them, fascinated by their power and grace. But tonight, something unimaginable was about to happen, something that would change his life forever. Marcus had stayed behind to help clean up the lion enclosure, a task he'd done many times before. He trusted the zookeepers, especially John, a seasoned employee who had been working at the zoo for over a decade. John was known for his no-nonsense attitude and his deep knowledge of the animals. But tonight, there was something off about him. His usual calm demeanor was replaced by a tense, almost agitated energy. Marcus didn't think much of it at first. He was too busy sweeping up the area near the enclosure, humming softly to himself. But then, without warning, everything changed. It happened so fast that Marcus barely had time to process it. One moment, he was standing near the edge of the enclosure, and the next, he felt a strong push from behind. He stumbled forward, his heart racing as he realized what was happening. The gate to the lion's enclosure was open, and he was falling straight into the den of the zoo's most fearsome predators. The last thing he saw before he hit the ground was John's face, twisted into an expression Marcus couldn't quite understand. Was it anger? Fear? Regret? He didn't know. All he knew was that he was now trapped in a space with 3 fully grown lions, their golden eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his blood run cold. The lions stirred, their massive bodies moving with a predatory grace that sent shivers down Marcus's spine. He froze, his mind racing. What was he supposed to do? Run? Scream? Play dead? He had read about lion behavior, but nothing could have prepared him for this. The largest lion, a male with a thick, dark mane, took a step toward him, its low growl reverberating through the enclosure. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. He could hear the distant shouts of other zoo employees, but they sounded far away, almost like they were in another world. He was alone, completely alone, with these apex predators. But then, something unexpected happened. The lion stopped. It tilted its head, almost as if it were studying him. The other 2 lions, both females, remained still. Their eyes locked on Marcus, but their bodies relaxed. Marcus' heart pounded in his chest as he slowly, carefully, got to his feet. He didn't dare make any sudden movements. He kept his eyes on the lions, his mind racing with a mix of fear and disbelief. Why weren't they attacking? Was this some kind of miracle? Or was it something else entirely? As the seconds ticked by, Marcus began to notice something strange. The lions weren't behaving like predators. Instead, they seemed curious. The male lion let out a soft chuff, a sound that was almost friendly. One of the females took a step closer, her movements slow and deliberate. Marcus held his breath, his body trembling. He didn't know what to do. Should he try to back away? Or stay perfectly still? His instincts screamed at him to run, but something deep inside told him to wait, to trust, to hope. Meanwhile, outside the enclosure, chaos had erupted. The other zoo employees had seen what happened and were frantically trying to figure out how to save Marcus. John, the man who had pushed him, was nowhere to be found. The remaining staff were divided. Some wanted to call the police, others wanted to try to distract the lions, and a few were too shocked to do anything at all. Time was running out, and every second felt like an eternity. The lions were unpredictable, and no one knew how long Marcus' luck would hold. Back in the enclosure, Marcus was still standing face to face with the lions. The male lion had moved even closer now, its massive head just inches away from Marcus' trembling body. Marcus could feel the heat of its breath, smell the musky scent of its fur. He closed his eyes, bracing himself for the worst, but instead of an attack, he felt something soft and warm brush against his hand. He opened his eyes to see the lion nuzzling him gently, almost like a house cat seeking affection. Marcus's fear began to melt away, replaced by a sense of awe and wonder. What was happening? Why were these lions acting so tame?
But just as Marcus started to relax, a loud noise shattered the moment. The lions' heads snapped up, their ears twitching as they focused on something in the distance. Marcus turned to see what had caught their attention, and his heart sank. A group of zoo employees had arrived with tranquilizer guns, their faces grim as they prepared to intervene. Marcus wanted to shout, to tell them to stop, but it was too late. The first dart was fired, and the male lion let out a roar of pain and confusion. The other lions scattered, their peaceful demeanor replaced by panic and aggression. Marcus's mind raced. He knew what would happen next. The lions would be sedated, and he would be rescued. But at what cost? The trust he had built with these magnificent creatures, in those brief, terrifying moments, would be shattered. And what about John? Why had he pushed Marcus into the enclosure in the first place? Was it an accident? Or something more sinister? As the chaos around him escalated, Marcus couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning of a much larger, darker story, one that would leave everyone questioning what they thought they knew about the zoo, its employees, and the animals they cared for. But for now, all Marcus could do was watch as the lions were subdued, their powerful bodies collapsing under the effects of the tranquilizers. He was safe for the moment. But the questions swirling in his mind were far from answered. What had just happened? And what would happen next? The answers, he knew, would change everything. The tranquilizers took effect quickly, and the lions slumped to the ground, their massive bodies lying still in the enclosure. Marcus stood frozen, his heart still racing, as the zoo employees rushed in to pull him to safety. Hands grabbed him, voices shouted instructions, and before he knew it, he was outside the enclosure, surrounded by a crowd of worried faces. Paramedics checked him for injuries, but Marcus barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the moments he had shared with the lions. The way they had looked at him, the way they had touched him, it didn't make sense. Lions were predators, not pets. So why had they spared him? As the initial shock began to wear off, Marcus's thoughts turned to John. Where was he? Why had he pushed Marcus into the enclosure? The questions swirled in his mind, but no answers came. The zoo was in chaos, with staff scrambling to secure the lions and figure out what had happened. Marcus overheard snippets of conversation words like negligence, investigation, and suspension, but no one mentioned John. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The next few hours were a blur. Marcus was taken to the zoo's administrative office, where he was questioned by the zoo director, a stern woman named Dr. Evelyn Carter. She asked him to recount everything that had happened, from the moment he entered the enclosure to the moment he was rescued. Marcus told her the truth, but he could tell she didn't believe him. How could she? His story sounded impossible, a boy thrown into a lion's den, only to be spared by the very animals that should have killed him. Dr. Carter listened patiently, but her expression grew more skeptical with every word. Marcus, she said finally, leaning forward in her chair, I need you to think carefully. Are you sure John pushed you? Could it have been an accident? Maybe you lost your balance. Marcus shook his head firmly. No, it wasn't an accident. He pushed me. I felt it. Dr. Carter sighed, rubbing her temples. This is a serious accusation, Marcus. John has been with us for over 10 years. He's one of our most trusted employees. If what you're saying is true, it could have devastating consequences for him, for the zoo, for everyone involved. Marcus didn't know what to say. He knew how it sounded, but he also knew what he had experienced. He wasn't lying. And yet, the doubt in Dr. Carter's voice made him question himself. Had he imagined it? Was it possible he had misread the situation? Before he could respond, the door to the office burst open, and a police officer stepped in. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately commanded attention. Dr. Carter, he said, we need to speak with Marcus. There's been a development. Dr. Carter nodded, her face pale. Of course. Marcus, this is Officer Daniels. He's going to ask you a few questions. Please cooperate. Marcus followed Officer Daniels to a small conference room, where another officer was waiting. They asked him to repeat his story, and this time, they took notes. Marcus noticed the way they exchanged glances when he mentioned John. It was clear they didn't believe him either. But then, something unexpected happened. Marcus, Officer Daniels said, his tone softening. We've received a tip about John. It seems he's been involved in some questionable activities outside of work. We're looking into it, but we need your help. If what you're saying is true, it could be part of a larger pattern. Marcus's eyes widened. What kind of activities? The officers hesitated, then exchanged another glance. We can't go into details, Officer Daniels said finally. But let's just say John may not be the person everyone thinks he is. The revelation sent a chill down Marcus's spine. He had always thought of John as a gruff but reliable zookeeper. But now he wasn't so sure. What if John had a darker side? What if pushing Marcus into the enclosure wasn't an isolated incident, but part of something much bigger? As the officers continued their questioning, Marcus's mind raced. He thought about the lions, about the way they had behaved. It was almost as if they had recognized him, as if they had chosen not to harm him. But why? And what did it mean? He didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Meanwhile, outside the zoo, the story was already making headlines. News vans lined the streets, and reporters clamored for information. The incident had sparked a firestorm of controversy, with animal rights activists demanding answers and the public demanding justice. Social media was ablaze with speculation, and the zoo was under immense pressure to respond. Back in the conference room, Marcus finished answering the officers' questions and was told he could go home. But as he stepped outside, he was met with a barrage of cameras and microphones. Reporters shouted questions at him, their voices blending into a cacophony of noise. Marcus felt overwhelmed, his heart pounding as he tried to push through the crowd. He just wanted to go home, to process everything that had happened. But he knew that wouldn't be easy, not with the world watching. As he made his way to the parking lot, Marcus spotted a familiar figure standing near his mother's car. It was Sarah, one of the other zoo volunteers. She was a year older than Marcus, and had always been kind to him. When she saw him, she rushed over, her face filled with concern. "Marcus, are you okay? I heard what happened. It's all anyone's talking about." Marcus nodded, though he didn't feel okay, not even close. "I'm fine," he said quietly. "But something's not right, Sarah. I don't know what's going on, but I think there's more to this than anyone realizes." Sarah frowned. "What do you mean?" Marcus hesitated, then decided to trust her. "The lions. They didn't attack me. They acted like they knew me. And John, I think he's involved in something bad. Something really bad." Sarah's eyes widened. "That's crazy. But if it's true, we need to figure out what's going on. You can't do this alone, Marcus. Let me help you." Marcus felt a surge of gratitude. He didn't know what he would do without Sarah. But as they climbed into the car, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into something much bigger and much more dangerous than they realized. The lions, John, the zoo, it was all connected. And Marcus was determined to find out how. But as they drove away, Marcus couldn't help but glance back at the zoo. The lions were still there, sedated and helpless. And somewhere, out there, John was hiding. Marcus didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. The truth was out there, and he was going to find it no matter what it took. The drive home was quiet, the weight of the day pressing heavily on Marcus's shoulders. His mother kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, her face a mix of worry and relief. She didn't ask many questions, and Marcus was grateful for that. He wasn't ready to talk about what had happened, not yet. His mind was still racing, trying to piece together the fragments of the day. The lions, John, the police, the reporters, it all felt like a tangled web, and Marcus wasn't sure where to start unraveling it.
When they got home, Marcus went straight to his room. He needed time to think, to process everything. But as he sat on his bed, staring at the walls, he realized he couldn't do this alone. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. Pulling out his phone, he texted Sarah, "Can you come over? We need to talk." Sarah arrived within the hour, her face serious, as she sat down on Marcus's bed. "What's going on?" she asked. "You sounded really freaked out in your text." Marcus took a deep breath, then told her everything about the lions, about John, about the police and their questions. Sarah listened intently, her eyes widening as he spoke. When he finished, she leaned back, her expression thoughtful. This is insane, she said finally. But if John's involved in something shady, we need to find out what it is. And if the lions acted like they knew you, there's got to be a reason. Maybe it's connected. Marcus nodded. That's what I was thinking. But how do we figure it out? The police are already investigating, but they don't seem to believe me. Sarah hesitated, then leaned forward, lowering her voice. What if we do our own investigation? We know the zoo better than anyone. Maybe we can find something the police missed. Marcus's heart raced at the idea. It was risky, but he didn't see any other option. Okay, he said. But we have to be careful. If John's really involved in something bad, he could be dangerous. The next morning, Marcus and Sarah met at the zoo before it opened. The place was eerily quiet, the usual hustle and bustle replaced by an uneasy stillness. They slipped through a side gate, avoiding the security cameras, and made their way to the lion enclosure. The lions were still sedated, lying motionless in their den. Marcus felt a pang of guilt as he looked at them. They didn't deserve this, none of it. Where do we start? Sarah whispered. Marcus thought for a moment, then nodded toward the employee break room. John spent a lot of time in there. Maybe we can find something. They crept into the break room, their footsteps soft on the tiled floor. The room was small and cluttered, with lockers lining the walls and a table in the center. Marcus went straight to John's locker, his hands trembling as he tried the combination lock. It didn't budge. Here, Sarah said, handing him a paperclip. Try this. Marcus bent the paperclip and fiddled with the lock until, finally, it clicked open. Inside the locker, they found a stack of papers, a laptop, and a small locked box. Marcus's heart pounded as he opened the laptop. It was password protected, but Sarah quickly pulled out her phone and connected it to the laptop, running a program to bypass the security. Where did you learn to do that? Marcus asked, impressed. Sarah grinned. YouTube. The laptop unlocked, and Marcus's eyes widened as he scanned the files. There were spreadsheets, emails, and documents all detailing illegal activities. John had been involved in a wildlife trafficking ring, using his position at the zoo to smuggle animals out of the country. The lions, it seemed, were just the beginning. This is huge, Sarah whispered. We have to take this to the police. Marcus nodded, but before he could respond, they heard footsteps outside the break room. They froze, their eyes locking in panic. The door creaked open, and there stood John, his face twisted in anger. What do you think you're doing? He snarled, stepping into the room. Marcus's heart raced as he backed away, clutching the laptop. We know what you've been doing, John. It's over. John's eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer. You have no idea what you're messing with, kid. Give me the laptop, and maybe I'll let you walk out of here. Marcus shook his head, his grip tightening. Number. You're not getting away with this. John lunged forward, but before he could reach Marcus, Sarah grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it at him. It connected with a loud thud, and John stumbled back, dazed. Marcus didn't hesitate. He grabbed Sarah's hand, and they ran out of the break room, the laptop clutched tightly under his arm. They didn't stop until they reached the zoo's main office, where Dr. Carter was on the phone. She looked up in surprise as they burst in, her eyes widening at the sight of the laptop. What's going on? She asked. Marcus handed her the laptop, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. John's involved in wildlife trafficking. It's all here. Dr. Carter's face turned pale as she scanned the files. Without a word, she picked up the phone and called the police. Within minutes, the zoo was swarming with officers. John was arrested on the spot, his face a mask of fury as he was led away in handcuffs. Marcus and Sarah watched from a distance, their hearts still racing. As the chaos died down, Dr. Carter approached them, her expression a mix of gratitude and regret. You two did something incredibly brave today, she said. You exposed something that could have destroyed this zoo and put countless animals at risk. Thank you. Marcus nodded, but his thoughts were already turning to the lions. What's going to happen to them? He asked. Dr. Carter sighed. They'll be taken to a sanctuary, where they can live out the rest of their lives in peace. They deserve that much. Marcus felt a wave of relief. The lions would be safe. And as for him, he knew he had done the right thing. It hadn't been easy, but he had stood up for what he believed in, and in the process, he had uncovered a truth that would change everything. As he and Sarah left the zoo that day, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The lions had spared him, and in return, he had saved them. It was a strange, beautiful symmetry that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. And as the sun set over the city, casting a golden glow over the zoo, Marcus knew one thing for sure. Sometimes, the most unexpected connections can lead to the most extraordinary outcomes. The lions had taught him that, and he would never forget it.